We need a global open science cloud where all the data for all the science that is publicly financed is available in a way anyone can use them. And you can only do that if you agree multilaterally.
Welcome to The Next Page, the podcast of the Library and Archives here at Geneva, dedicated to advancing the conversation on multilateralism. We're back in 2026, helping to connect knowledge, people and ideas.
And we're going to be focusing across several episodes on knowledge diplomacy. Join me, Wouter Schallier,
And me, Amy Smith.
as we speak with experts, practitioners and thinkers who bridge knowledge and diplomacy in today's interconnected world.
Follow us for conversations that open the next page on how knowledge drives global understanding. Today we have a special episode, and I'm here with my colleague Wouter. And with us here we have a very special guest. We have Jean-Claude Burgelman, who is Emeritus Professor at the Free University of Brussels. He left the European Commission in Brussels in 2020, where he was in charge of the Commission's policies on open science, the European Open Science Cloud, open data and open access. And he became the Editor-in-Chief of Frontiers Policy Lab, a platform designed to reinvent the world with science. In 2022, he became the Director of Frontiers Planet Prize, a mission-driven prize to promote science that can save the planet. And indeed, Jean-Claude is just back from Davos, where Frontier Science House was keen to put transformative science back at the heart of the global agenda. Jean-Claude, so for someone who has been leading programs for research and innovation and who is quite convinced that open science can save the world, perhaps not by itself, would you tell us perhaps a little bit more about yourself and explain exactly what open science is in sort of simple, everyday language?
First of all, thank you for inviting me. It's really a pleasure to contribute to this, in particular, given what I think Davos taught us, but we will come back on that later on. So my background is in communication technology policy at university. I was professor there at a research center. And then I went to the European Commission to study the socioeconomics of information technologies. And then later on, the impact of new technologies on the economy, on mobility and so on. And the last chapter of it was the impact all the new digital technologies would have on science. And that was a piece of work which we started doing in 2011. And looking at it, our analysis was, together with my colleagues in the GRC in Sevilla, was what the dramatic impact that new technologies had on, for example, the retail sector. Amazon, in those days, was still a small startup. Well, that impact we will most likely see also in science, and it means that the dynamics of science will change. They will go towards more collaboration, more openness, more direct relationship between the producers of science, the consumers, the scientists in this respect, and so on. So that was one element of my background. The other element, which made me think this is really the next thing to happen, is that I in those days I went for the European Commission to Davos, and I attended at 7:00 in the morning. I will not forget it because it was very cold and very early. A section on the innovation strategies of Nike, the sport brand company. And then the CEO said in a small meeting, said, listen, our policy is that whatever patent we don't use after 2 years, we make it openly available so that others can use. We did the investment anyhow, and it's a pity that it is being rotten there somewhere in a drawer. So we really push for open innovation. And that made me move into the direction of open science. I put the two things together. The technologies make it possible to do science in a new way. Even big companies are going that way. So it is very logical that it will go for open science in the same way. And the proof of the pudding is COVID and the vaccine. In the years of COVID 2020, not that long ago, immediately the world of science made almost all their articles related to COVID, 1 million, openly available. Companies did the same. So you created a gigantic knowledge pool where everyone working on a vaccine or trying to fine-tune it could just plug in, use the latest knowledge, and you do it. And that is part of the explanation, I'm quite sure, that we found the vaccine so fast. So what is open science? The open science is that the results of the knowledge industry, which is science and universities, which is, by the way, mainly publicly financed, is made openly available in a way that everyone can use it, so that you can speed up the growth of knowledge and the science and the growth of innovation. That is, in a nutshell, open science. It has nothing to do with an ideology that I am in favor of God knows what egalitarian principle, which, by the way, I am, but that's not the point. The point is we make this gigantic knowledge pool on which 14 million people, scientists in the world, work. We make it available to anyone to go to the next step, and in doing so, we speed up the search for solutions. We speed up the search for what our societies expect from science to deliver.
Beautifully explained. Wouter.
Yeah, excellent. And so why should people who are not scientists care about open science?
Well, it is. You have to see this as a kind of open science. If all science in the world is openly available, which, by the way, it isn't. Most of the science is still behind paywalls. Most of the data is not in formats that can be used. But imagine all that is openly available. One of the arguments I used in the European Commission to convince the hierarchy, and after 2 years I really convinced them, and they supported me a lot, by the way, is the following. We have 23 million SMEs in Europe, who do not have the money to buy expensive access to scientific databases. If we have our publicly funded science in Europe openly available to these people in a way that they can access it, which makes sense, and if 1% of the 23 million startups is using it, and 1% of that 1% becomes a top company or a unicorn, we have created, by making science openly available, 2,300 companies per year. We're at a cost which is zero, because all the investment has been done. The science has been done, the articles have been written, the data have been gathered, and we make them openly available. So you have an enormous accelerator mechanism for science and innovation, which costs nothing to the policy and to businesses. It is paid already.
So really, open science is a driver for innovation, right?
It is the accelerator of innovation. Many things drive innovation, but by making it openly available, you accelerate it with a factor you can never ever have if it is all behind paywalls or if the data are not accessible. So it is a gigantic booster of innovation, and we need it. You know, the example I gave about COVID. So we had a period where all the articles were openly available. By the way, they are closing down again. But if you compare it to the other diseases which account for most of the deadly cases in the world, like cancer and pollution and so on, there we see that only a fraction, 20-30%, I can give you the exact figures if you want later on, but we see that only a fraction of that science is openly available, which means that the potential for someone with a brilliant idea sitting somewhere in Botswana, just to give you an example, to see what is possible, I have a brilliant idea, that potential doesn't exist. So instead of using the maximum of the scientific population, their brains, we use only the fraction that can have access. And by the way, for what is close to my concern, which is now the planetary health, so how to keep our planet a healthy place for everyone and everything living on it, there we see that less than 6% of all the science published is openly available, which means that all these thousands of NGOs working day and night for free to do something about the planet cannot access the science they need to make sure that their action is scientifically sound. So that the accelerator effect is there. By making it openly available, you accelerate the potential to harvest the good ideas.
Yeah, and it would be a shame to waste all of that potential. It sounds so logical and so exciting. I was wondering, what drew you personally to open science? When did you see all the connection between all of this?
Well, for me, the connection policy-wise came when we studied the impact of digital technologies on how our societies functions. As I said, economy, politics, mobility. And then I said, well, it's quite logical that the world of science will not escape it. So that was the first click. But the second click is, as a scientist myself, as an ex-scientist, sorry. So I did publish quite a few things, and then I was, I published with the Joint Research Center. We published a very, very successful forecast on the future of artificial intelligence technologies in 2005. And that was made, it was a very good report, openly available, and it got tens of thousands of downloads. And then I saw that some of the articles, I published a few articles myself in open access journals, and I saw that I was very quickly being picked up by colleagues of scientists. So another element that made the click, and that has been studied in the meantime, if you publish in open access, you get 3 to 4 times more quote citations. Now, as you know, citations is for a scientist, it's like the gold standard. So if I publish my article, which I have to publish anyway, in a format that other people can pick it up immediately, and I get 3 to 4 times more citation, why wouldn't I do it? It would be stupid not to do it. So those two things, you put it together and you have the click. But also, if I may, I also think it's our responsibility as a system which is mainly funded by public money to maximize return. I mean, my salary at the university was paid by my fellow Belgians, and my office was paid by my university, who got the subsidy from the Belgian taxpayer. So I did not invest €1 in everything that I ever did except my time. So it's only logical, I think, that the public system or the public investment made in science is maximized in return by making the results of that public science system openly available.
That's very ethical too.
And so you've been championing open science for years, Jean-Claude. What makes it particularly crucial now for addressing global challenges?
Well, I think if you look at what are the big challenges that are facing us in the coming decades, probably aside war and peace, which is a gigantic challenge where I'm not so sure a lot of science can help, but still that's another discussion. One of the biggest challenges, if not the biggest, is to make sure that our planet stays a healthy place for the next centuries to come. And the decades in which this will be decided are the coming 2 to 3 decades. We all know by 2050 we should have zero emissions, zero CO2, etc., etc. Which means that we have, to put it very bluntly, we have 25 years to solve it. Which means if we follow the normal pattern of a scientific discovery becoming implemented, it's between 30 and 40 years. So I'm quite sure that if we would let run the system as it is, we would come up with the solution, but it would be too late. Because that is always the time lag between a fundamental new insight and an application is 30 to 40 years. We simply don't have the time. We must speed it up. So aside of all the ethical thing and the innovation drive, we must speed up the search for solutions for our planet. And the easiest way to start the speed up is by making the science openly available so that anyone who thinks has a good idea can contribute.
And we saw that during COVID. I mean, you've mentioned that already.
Yeah, during COVID, it happened, and the success was spectacular. So there is absolutely no reason. And scientists want to have an impact. You don't write papers only for citations. You write most scientists write papers for having an impact. If I can maximize my impact by collaborating, I will do it. The reports made by the IPPC are perfect examples how scientists work together in an open format and come up with fantastic reports in a record time. And by the way, I don't know if this is the right moment to say, but there is something which is very important, which we didn't think of 5 years ago when we were so advocating for open science. A lot of the AI models that we have are trained on, as you know, on publicly available data. So a lot of the models that come up with health advice, that come up with advice on reducing your CO2 impact, are trained on publicly available data, which means, because 60% of all scientific data are still behind paywalls, that they are not trained on 60% of the knowledge. So we are developing highly sophisticated LLMs and AI models and applications based on AI for a very essential part of our life and our society on a fraction of the knowledge that we have, because today 40% is openly available, but 10 years ago it was 20%. So you train your data on a fraction of the knowledge that you need to come up with the best model thinkable. And that is mind-boggling. So only from that point of view, we should make it openly tomorrow.
Perfect argument. Wouter.
All right. So you mentioned the enormous benefits of open science. Why is open science not the default science now? What are the barriers for open science becoming the default way we do research?
In my view, there are two barriers. The first one is follow the money. Publishing is a very lucrative business. We know all the figures. We know how wealthy and how well-to-do some of the big scientific publishers are. It's like the oil industry. There is absolutely no reason to assume that the oil industry by itself will stop producing oil as long as they can win so much money with it. The same is true for publishing. You can make a significant amount of money with having articles behind paywalls. I'm not saying that these publishers are not doing an effort, but it is minimal. That's why it goes much slower than I thought. When in 2016 we launched the Commission policies on open access and open data, I expect that 10 years later, the majority of the articles would be in open access. It isn't the case. Why? And some parts, like the COVID articles, they are again being put behind paywalls. It is because simply it is a too profitable business with high return on investment, with enormous profit margins and so on. By the way, parenthesis, I'm not saying that publishing should be free. I don't mind to pay for a service from a top publisher, but it should be reasonable and it should not block open access. That's one thing. But the second block, and that is something I call all the scientists, if they listen, I call on to think about. The second block is ourselves, scientific community. And there we are trapped. We are trapped. Why? Because many scientists, I gave maybe 100 and more lectures to scientific groups when I was at the Commission to explain an open science, and the reaction was always the same. First of all, will my data not be stolen? Which is, of course, a quite nonsensical argument, because if the data are openly available from everyone, you can't steal it. You can reuse it. That's different. And we can install a mechanism so that your data gets cited, so you get an extra citation. That's the first thing. And the second reaction is, yes, but I did suffer so much to get all my articles published. So shall my colleague now have an easy life? And that is a nonsensical argument. But in open access journals, the rejection rate is very high. In Frontier, the rejection rate is very high, as high as in any other publisher. And the third reason, and the most important reason and the most perverse reason why scientists don't move forward is, of course, you are obliged, if you want big grants, you are obliged in the top journals, and almost all the top journals are journals that are not in open access available. So we keep on feeding the system. If tomorrow we would say, okay, these are the 50 top journals, they are not in open access, we no longer publish in it, within 6 months the whole system is changing. But we will not say it as a scientist, as an individual, because I need, if I publish in the top journals, there are studies about that. If you have a publication in Nature, the likelihood that you go for associate professor is very, very high. The correlation is almost 1. So we keep the system of promotion and of impact factor works in such a way that it maintains the status quo. There is no incentive for a scientist to make his life difficult there. You see? And that those three together, on the one hand, there is a lot of money to be made there because it's a very profitable business. And the fact that the academic system is not following, because we have inherently built in our system some perverse mechanism that stop you from going to open access journals, explains why it goes much slower than was foreseen, and why it is not universal, although everyone says, yeah, it is logical that we should go in open access.
So you can really see what needs to change. And I think that's maybe another discussion. Perhaps we could move on a bit and talk about multilateralism and open science.
All right. Yes. So how do you see the relationship between open science and multilateral collaboration, Jean-Claude? Are we talking about a technical infrastructure a political project or a new social contract for knowledge?
Well, it should be the three. Huh? I think optimal science by default is global. What is the magic of science is that what I say will be challenged by you if you have good reason. That makes me smarter and we have a better product. Now, if you cut that, because we suddenly start dividing the world into several blocks, and inevitably then it will fall on the science as well, then you actually kill the dynamic and the magic of science. So multilateralism and science are synonyms, in my view, because it's a global enterprise. Now, that means, I think, because it is global, it's a little bit of a detour, but the science system was invented, as we know it today, was invented in the 50s, 60s after the Second World War. It was transatlantic, dominated by first Europe, then the US, and then Europe. And it was a very simple thing. And it was a transatlantic thing. You went on a scholarship in the US and vice versa, and that's it. Now we are in a situation where the main producer of science in volume and in impact is China. Number 2 is the US. Number 3 is Europe. Plus, we have emerging stars like India, like the Far East, like the Middle East. So it is no longer a bilateral relationship. It is a relationship like a kind of a distributed brain all over the world. If you look at Frontier's fantastic maps where all our articles get downloaded and you get all these lights all over the world. So it's really fantastic to see that. So that can only work if, first of all, the politics do not make it impossible to work. If tomorrow some country would say that because something I don't like, all our scientists can no longer work in the global brain, well, then you have a big problem. So that means that part falls out, but also the return. Secondly, I do think, given that science is data intensive, all science is data intensive, all data require huge infrastructures to host and to process and to manage. I think to underpin that multilateral endeavor of science, we should invent multilateral infrastructures for open science, whereby you have a kind of an archipelago. It is connected and not connected. You have a kind of an archipelago of data centers all over the world where you work together. The data stay where they are, but you work together on the software level so that the data can travel. That was a little bit the idea of the European Open Science Cloud. We need a global open science cloud where all the data for all the science that is publicly financed is available in a way anyone can use them. And you can only do that if you agree multilaterally, which means if you are Chinese and I am European, as an example, we can access each other's data based on the reciprocity. You can access mine if I can access yours. Otherwise, the game stops there. So you see, it is by default multilateral, and it is also, if you want to maximize the impact of science and the innovation speed of science, we have to think in that direction. It makes no sense to cut out significant parts of the world in the scientific enterprise. So you can do it, but it will slow down everything. And that means, to come back to your third point, that the all social contract between science and society based on transatlantism, Europe, US, has to change. We have to rethink it. It is no longer bilateral. It is multilateral by definition, and we have to find a way to come together. And there, I really don't know what the direction should be, but we have to find a new way to empower maybe existing institutions or invent new institutions to come up with a global council for governing open science or something like that. I'm inventing now something. But that, by the way, if I may, we are with the Frontiers Policy Lab, so we have launched a series of think pieces on precisely this, how to reinvent the institutions of science and the governance of science in the future. And there are people from your organization involved, and we would like to present the results at the UN summit in September, I think, in New York, and then the final result in the next Davos. But okay, that's some publicity.
Well, we'd love to hear a lot more about that. Yeah, I was going to ask.
So it all fits together.
It does.
Multilateralism, because it is the essence of science, the infrastructure, because of otherwise you simply have a situation like you have with AI companies. Only a few countries can afford it, and that has to be supported by a new social contract which reflects multilateralism and reciprocity and dignity, very important that we respect each other.
Absolutely. Yes, it's all very clear. I was wondering about the international organizations that exist now. What specific roles can they play more to embed open science in how we cooperate and deal with challenges in the world?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because that was when I was at the Commission. So I as you know, it's not the world, but still it's a big part of the world, and we inevitably we always needed to work via the member states to get something done. Now that is in itself quite laborious, because if you put 10 scientists together and we have this discussion, I'm quite sure 9 out of 10 will go out of the room agreeing with us, because from a scientific person, it all makes sense. If you put 10 policymakers together in science on this topic, I'm quite sure we will not get an agreement, because that's what it is. So it is very difficult to see how what exists today can just take over the role of governing this kind of global commons, global brain, which science is, in a way that no one feels threatened. It's very difficult, because a lot of the supranational institutions are politicized. By politicized, I mean everyone is sitting there to defend his own interest. So I am thinking in the direction, and that's what I would like to do in the policy labs, and see how far we get there. Why don't we invent a system like we have for the internet, the ICANN system, the WWWC organization, where you have a mix of self-governing by the interested parties and some observers, and they govern the thing. And of course, you do it in collaboration with the national authorities, because you need them on board. But the driver should be more bottom-up by the stakeholders. I think it will be much more healthy, and it will be much more respected if the world of science takes its fate in its own hands, without saying there that we can just behave as if the rest of the world doesn't exist. Of course, that doesn't make any sense. But I think we have to go in that direction. So these things have to be invented.
Yeah, sounds like a plan.
But shall we talk a little bit now about Davos? We started with that. Let's hear more. Wouter.
Yes, you were there, and Jean-Claude, and there was the Frontier Science House in Davos. What did you set out to achieve, and what happened in this science house in Davos? Could you transmit some of the energy that you lived there in Davos, the conversations you had with the people in that room?
Okay, what we did in Davos was quite unique. Why? Because for the first time, there was a dedicated space and an extensive program devoted to science in Davos, which is quite unbelievable. I mean, when I was at the Commission, I remember that as representative of the Commission, I had to chair a working group of the World Economic Forum on science, but that was dissolved after a year. So in Ergo, we had 2 meetings, and that was about it. So what we did now, what Frontiers did now, was saying, okay, science is missing in all the reflections about policy and the future of the world. Let's put it back in the middle where it belongs, meaning the science house. And that's what we did. And we worked on the key topics of today, which is AI, science and governance, planetary health, the future of the brain, medicine, and so on. So we had several sessions on that. And we did that in partnership with many organizations and universities. But of course, it's always a little bit of a gamble. It was the first time it happened. The program was very good a priori, but you never know what the reception was. Now, to our big surprise, it was overwhelming. All sessions were booked out. We had a constant stream of people coming there, finding us, speaking about us. It was I'm not going to say we were the talk of the town, because there was the President of the United States there, and he was the talk of the town, and then the President of Canada, the Prime Minister, and then the Prime Minister of Belgium. But in that hierarchy, we were somewhere. And why? I think what I felt is the following. It's not only because we had a good program and a nice place on the promenade, but by doing this, we did the opposite of what you feel sometimes in the real world happening, namely rather than questioning science, make it suspicious and this and that, which is a little bit in the air the last year and before that, we did exactly the opposite. We said science can do it, but engage with us. Don't demonize it because you don't like the consequences of science. That is what happened with COVID. But engage with the scientists and let us find together how we can make a better world, which is the slogan of Davos. So we felt, being there, we felt an enormous positive return. Just to give you a little example, so on a Friday morning, the last day of Davos, where almost everyone is half dead, after 5 days like that, and already some are leaving, we had a breakfast meeting, which is a closed meeting on the future of open science, by the way, and we had 2 Nobel Prize winners attending there at Friday morning, 8:00, last day of Davos.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic.
Yeah.
And they don't need to do that for their career. There was no press, there was no big coverage, and that happened all the time because we really had very relevant people attending our sessions and engaging. And my feeling, but this is intuitive, and my feeling is that there was a kind of a turning point in the global attitude of scientists and policymakers. And listen, we cannot only suffer what they do to us, we must take our future in our own hands and go out to society and come up with the New Deal and show what we can do. So we came back full of exhausted but full of energy.
That's so exciting. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Was there any pushback? Was there any skepticism or, I don't know, concerns raised in some way?
But that's the point of Davos. You see, I've always been a big fan of Davos. The point of Davos is that 90% of the people that are there have a certain responsibility and are very concerned about what they do and what the impact is on the mid to long term. Concerned, or they think about it. So they are not just there just to spend the week. So most of the people know that we have to face a few challenges which we cannot deny. You can call the climate crisis a hoax, but it will not go away. So, and that's the attitude of most of the people in Davos, even though it doesn't mean they all think the same, they're all left or right or whatever, on the contrary, but it does mean that you have an audience that will not sidestep the challenge because they don't like the challenge. They take it full face and they are engaging, and then you have very interesting debates about what it could be, what it could mean, and so on. But it doesn't mean that so we had actually 0 counterweights there. Now that might change, of course, in if you become more explicit. But again, the whole spirit of Davos is, in my view, more of convergence of what to do and what ways to follow rather than divergence.
Yeah, excellent. In terms of outcomes for open science that could make a difference for open science, what could you choose if you had to choose 2 of those outcomes that you take from Davos?
Well, I think that we have shown and proved that open science is the accelerator for innovation and for ideas. There were colleagues of us who were presenting the Open Brain Institute, which is, they give away 20 years of work translated into 80 million lines of code, whereby you can simulate the brain. They are giving it away. They have created an Open Brain Institute, and already now we have 450 laboratories all over the world using bits and pieces of that knowledge to do whatever they want to know. So that example, I can tell you, was a bomb when people saw that. And that was really, like the COVID thing, an illustration of the accelerator effect of open science. So that's the first takeaway. And the second takeaway is that we need to find a way to translate open access of data and open access of publication. So in one word, open science. We have to translate that into a new social contract of science and society. We must find ways. Your question about multilateralism, about an infrastructure, etc. We must find a way to embed it there. We cannot treat this as a Mercosur discussion, It is a bit more complicated than that. And the world of science has to take the lead there.
Yeah. Absolutely. But looking at the other way round as well, what can some of our listeners, policymakers or citizens or, people in general, what are some ways that they can support and participate or use open science?
Well, the first thing they can support it is by not, I always say this, people and the news and the media, they always focus on the long tail of what doesn't work well. This classical thing, 90% works well, but is whatever, and 10% is a problem. Okay, we know that there are paper mills. We know that there is manipulation of data. We know that there is plagiarism. We know that scientific AI is hallucinating, but that's a fraction. There are 4 to 6 million papers per year being published. And let's say maybe if only 60, 80,000 of them are being retracted, that's a minimal fraction of the totality. But policymakers tend to focus on that. And they focus on the long tail and not on all the rest what science can deliver. That is the first thing that the policymaker should do, is please look at what does work and not what does not work. I always get very, very nervous if people tell me you can no longer trust what is being published in the scientific journals. Then I'm saying, okay, if you go into a plane, do you trust the science on which the plane was built or not? It was all built in the journals that you say are completely rubbish and manipulated and publishing idiot things. So that's one thing. And the second thing where I think policymakers can help a lot is make a distinction between the science and the consequences of science. That was the key problem with COVID. The science for COVID was crystal clear. We know what was the reason, more or less, and we know the results. But the science was attacked because some politicians did not like the lockdown, that we had to stay at home. But that doesn't mean that the science was wrong. It means that the political decision was not accepted, and that's another discussion. So we should try to keep those things distinct, and that is, again, a long tail mechanism. You focus on the part that you don't like, and you forget the part that does work.
Very interesting observations. Yeah. How would you like to close, Jean-Claude? What would you like to leave us with?
I would like to say, first of all, thank you very much for this opportunity, and it's a pleasure to share these views. And then secondly, a second thing I would like to share is please come and see us at Davos next year, because we will be back. So you're all welcome to join us, and whatever we can do together, we will. And then thirdly, the Prime Minister of Belgium said in the discussion of that was held together with the Prime Minister of Singapore, he said something which is very applicable to the world of science as well. What is going on in science and the way, for example, climate science is being demonized has clearly an agenda which has nothing to do with science. It has another agenda. And to quote our Prime Minister, when he was reflecting on the geopolitics, he said, listen, what is going on, it can break us or it will wake us up. Well, the same applies for us in the world of science, with all the policymakers, people like you who like this world. We should not let us being broken up by some of the stupid things which we see in the world. But on the other hand, it should wake us up. We have to rethink the institutions. We have to rethink the infrastructures. We have to rethink the modus operandi, which has to become open access and open science. So it will not become sui generis, but we have to wake up and take this whole thing in our own hands and come up with a science system that is fit for the 21st century.
How do you imagine open science and global cooperation in 5 years, for example?
Well, to start with, I hope. We are quite not on top, but I follow very closely the impact AI has for science, because I think what the internet did for science, which was my generation, AI will do for science, except it is accelerator factor X. So it is X time bigger impact as the internet. So what I think we must have is we must absolutely get our act together, make sure that all the data that the scientific system is producing in 5 years' time is openly available in a controlled format Open doesn't mean everything should be available. By the way, it's not free. I'm not talking about a free system. And of course, military data and patient health data are not openly available. We know, but there are many ways to cover that. But the basis of science will be data. The basis of AI are data. So that basis should be part of a global common good, so to speak, but we should have it worldwide in 5 years to come, governed by a council of science or whatever, like the internet, and that should become the engine of a new multilateral agreement on the scientific world system.
Well, I hope it happens that quickly.
5 years is long, It's long, but at the same time, the Berlin Wall fell in 1 month, so we can make this happen in 5 years.
That's great positivity. I love that. Thank you so much, Jean-Claude, for joining us.
Thank you so much.